Hola gente, seguidoras, seguidores del grupo Grite. Hoy la introducción va a ser muy breve porque tenemos muchas preguntas y porque el invitado no necesita demasiada presentación. Básicamente es una leyenda viviente del cómic estadounidense. John Mark DeMatteis. Welcome to your little chat and thank you for your time.
I'm delighted to talk to you guys. Very happy to be here with you.
Thank you very much indeed.
Thank you.
So let's far away because we got a lot of questions about your work. Fantastic work, if I may say.
Thank you. I
La...
hope I have answers.
We don't care. We don't care. It's, in the people, the horror people, the writer people, we talk a chit chat that we understand each other no matter we would say. And this is really, really interesting because we are, you say, oh, this, I say this for, and the people make a whole fandom lore about your question or your answer. So let's go.
Okay.
Mi primera pregunta es sobre sus primeras historias publicadas. Las primeras historias de Matthijs eran sobre el género del terror. Y lo que llama la atención es que en historias como The Blood Boat o publicada en Weird Weird Tales o The Lady Killer's Grace Blood, básicamente las trabaja como alegorías de la deshumanización, tanto en la guerra como la deshumanización en general. La pregunta sería ¿cuál fue su acercamiento al terror en aquella época?
Fernando would like to know, in order to your first works, that you earliest published stories were works of horror, often crafted as allegories of the human condition. For instance, The Blood Boat in Weird World Tales and The Lady Killer Craves Blood. I love this title. Function as allegories of the humanization. The proper question is, what was your approach to the horror genre on that time?
You know, it's interesting because I didn't necessarily grow up a huge horror fan. The horror movies on TV were part of the culture when I was growing up, and I certainly read Stephen King and I read Dracula in college, but it wasn't my forte necessarily. But when I broke into comics at DC, the way you broke in those days, the way they trained and developed new writers was they weren't allowed to call them horror comics. They called them mystery books because for some reason the comics code wouldn't let them call them horror. So that's what you had to do. So, for me, as opposed to outright horror, what I loved was like the Twilight Zones type of story, the kind of story where you take that turn to the left and the universe suddenly tilts on its side and things just aren't the way they're supposed to be. And there's a very human person at the center of it. So these were little 6 to 8 page stories. And what was great about it for me as a new writer is you had to learn everything there was to know about telling a story within the context of 6, sometimes 5 pages, 5 to 8 page stories. You had to have character development. You had to have a strong plot. You had to have, learn your dialogue. You had to have a twist ending like the old Twilight Zones. So what I discovered along the way was even though I wasn't a horror aficionado, I was good at it. And I've seen that again and again over the years. I'm going to sidebar a little bit. One of my favorite things that I've ever done in animation was an animated movie with John Constantine called Constantine's City of Demons, which is a flat out horror story. And what I realized was, I really enjoy working in this genre because it allows you to peek into corners of people's psyches and literalize them, in these forms of these creatures, these monsters, and also to get into the sort of metaphysical side of life as well. So it's a fascinating arena to move into. And there's also a very thin line between that Twilight Zone kind of story, or even the Ray Bradbury type of story, and the flat out horror story. As long as they're grounded I hope I'm not going on too long. As long as it's grounded in humanity, for me, as long as it's grounded in real people, real emotions, and real concerns, then you can use these forms, just as you said, metaphorically to tell stories about what's going on in our heads and our hearts.
Amazing, amazing, amazing. Okay, Fernando.
Perdón, en Marvel, en uno de los números de Marvel Team Up, DeMatteis hizo un team up entre Spider-Man y Nighthawk. Y en la portada de ese número figura los espectros de los años 60 regresan, según reza la portada. Efectivamente, la historia gira alrededor de los espectros de los años 60 regresando para acechar a Spider-Man y a Nighthawk. Mi pregunta es, ¿cree que Vietnam, los shootings, los disparos, la masacre en la Universidad de Kent, ocurrida en aquellos años, es una sombra acechante, es una sombra en su obra?
Fernando is referring to one of the well, my gosh, one of the
Marvel Team Up 101, right?
yeah. Well,
I can't believe I remember that.
No. In one of your stories, Marvel Team Up, you wrote a story pairing Spider-Man with Nighthawk, in which, as in the same cover, rather evocatively states the spectres of 60s return. The narrative indeed revolves around the idea. So Fernando would like to know that if do you feel that the Vietnam War and the shooting for those days of the Kent State University cast a haunting shadow over your work for those days?
It's an interesting question. I have to say, these stories that we're talking about right now are so long ago, it's hard for me to retrieve the memory of what I was thinking and feeling when I wrote them. And like that was one of the very first stories I wrote for Marvel. These are all very early in my career. That said, I came of age in the 60s. And yes, that entire decade cast a pall. One of my earliest memories is I was in the third grade or something, third or fourth grade during the Cuban Missile Crisis. If you know about, I'm sure you know about the Cuban Missile Crisis.
Yeah.
Yes.
Where literally we thought the world was going to end the next day. I remember seeing President Kennedy on TV giving this speech where he basically said, I don't know, guys, we may not be here tomorrow, And I remember walking to school with my friends, literally, and the conversation was,
that's it.
The world is going to end.
Yeah.
So that was my childhood. And then the next year, Kennedy is assassinated.
Yeah.
And then comes, as I get a little bit older, student riots and cities burning and Kent State when I was in high school. You can't grow up with that and not carry that with you for the rest of your life. It's just part of what shapes you.
Yeah.
So I'm always fascinated with those themes. But what's fascinating to me about that point in time is it was a very scary time. But look at a lot of what came out of that. What was the counterculture doing in response to that? It was all about consciousness expansion. It was all about love and connection and compassion in a very youthful, naive way, for sure. But the response to that was something very, very positive, embodied in many ways by the Beatles. It all comes down, right, to all you need is love.
Yeah.
So it's a fascinating dichotomy. And in fact, I've got a new book that just came out here called Dark Future, which deals with the same themes, which is a theme that's run through all my work and all my life. Because I am essentially a hopeful and idealistic person. I believe in the best of people. I believe that we're all essentially divine, that God lives within us. And yet you look at the world and you see some of the stuff going on, especially right now, and there's this push-pull between our faith and our belief and our hope and what's happening in the world. And, I don't know if that's something we can ever fully reconcile while we're in these bodies, but it's something that is always worth exploring in stories, the gap between our highest selves and our lowest actions, if you know what I mean.
Yes, absolutely, sir. Great answer, if I may say. Okay, Jorge,
Okay.
your time.
Sí, bueno, agradeciendo nuevamente el hecho de que se encuentre aquí con nosotros. Mi pregunta es doble y encadena de alguna manera, continúa con esta pregunta que le hizo Fernando. Eh, ¿Cómo influye el contexto histórico y lo ideológico en la escritura de un guión de cómic o de un guión para televisión, pero particularmente en los cómics, tanto para la compañía DC o para la compañía Marvel? ¿Y cuáles de esos contextos históricos en donde trabajó consideró de mayor fluidez creativa dentro de la obra, dentro de su obra?
All right. Jorge have two questions related, each one with the other. He wants to know that how do historical circumstances and ideological climates influence the writing of a comic book script with large companies like Marvel or DC Comics? How the social environment, the Geldstadt, the movement of the time make the influence in the companies and the companies in the writers, or even the writer himself or herself, according to what is happening around, as you say a couple of minutes ago.
These are good questions. I have to think about this a
Thank
little bit. We're human beings. We're living in the world. There's not like this little hermetically sealed bubble where a comic book company exists and where the creators exist. We have to be responding to the world. And if you look at the history of comics, you look at, say, Marvel Comics in the 60s, as the 60s progressed, and they had to start to address, however simply or naively perhaps, what was going on in the world. Because you're living in the world, you have to address that. And the same thing in the early 70s when a lot of young creators came in, the people that grew up as fans, the Steve Engleharts and Steve Gerbers and Len Weins and all those guys, they were much more willing, able to address those things, I think, and they were much more connected to it. But even someone like Jack Kirby, who went through his experiences in World War II that haunted him, and all those great Fourth World comics, which are my favorite comics of all time, were driven by his experiences and his traumas and his hopes and his fears. So, of course, we can't, just as I was saying before, we can't separate ourselves from the world that we are formed in. And yet, we all have different filters. Our experiences, our personalities, the essence of who we are, those experiences go in, but they come out of every writer and every artist in a different way. So writer A may look at the world and see it's in chaos and decide that life is meaningless and not worth living and blah, 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 and have a very, very dark point of view. I take that in, and it still brings me to a very, very positive point of view about humanity, about life, about who we are on the planet. So yes, the environment affects us and dictates how we're going to respond to that. But we're all very different, so we all come to different conclusions, and that's probably the same all through time, because every era is traumatizing in some way. I think in many ways what we're living through right now, at least in the United States, is probably, in terms of what's going on and the craziness of it, the closest we've come to the craziness of the 1960s. It's in a different way, but it's just as crazy, maybe I would think more crazy, because we're tilting, we have other things going on. But, it's not that different from a kid growing up in Brooklyn like I did, thinking the world was going to end because we were going to have nuclear war at any time. Just because the Cuban Missile Crisis was over didn't mean we weren't worried about it all the time. So it all depends on the personality of the individual. So yes, those things all affect us and impact us, but we all respond to it differently.
Yeah. Well, if I may introduce just a little word quotation, there is a Spanish singer and writer that said that sometimes life dripping in which I'm writing. So this is impossible to avoid, I think,
Hmm.
beyond any kind of consideration of order or whatever the company, sometimes they say, let's go for this place or for this another place, and the reluctance or the acceptance of the writer. But yes, without our consent, life dripping in our writing is very
You know, and
true.
to go with what you're saying about the companies, it made me think of something. Times change, what's acceptable changes. When I was working on Captain America in the early 1980s, I had a character named Arnie Roth that I introduced, who was Steve Rogers' best friend from childhood, who was gay. There
Hmm.
weren't gay characters in comics then, and I had to tread very carefully about how I presented that. And there was some push and pull with editorial about things I could say, things I couldn't say. Whereas if you do that now, it's fine. In fact, it's encouraged. We want diversity in the comics. We want everyone represented. So there's that level also where it's not so much the company dictating, but the company same way responding to what's going on in the world and afraid if you say this or do this, people might not buy our comic books. The creator is thinking about story and character and art, and the company, unfortunately, because they have to, is thinking about commerce and will this sell and who's going to respond and who's going to reject it. And it makes me wonder right now, I haven't seen it, but given what's happening in the United States, where there's real repression on the entertainment business, what the thinking is at the various companies about what you can put in a comic book and what you can't. I haven't run into it, but I bet you that's going on because everyone's a little kind of looking over their shoulders right now. And even things you could say and do 5 years ago, maybe they're afraid to say and do now. But then 5 years from now, it'll be different. So it's always shifting.
Yes, this caveman who used salt in I used to say people from 5 years from now would say this caveman that used salt to seasoning the food. They were caimans. So, we don't know what's going to happen, but the gods of the ones is the devil of the others. So
Hmm.
it's all right. Next question, guys.
En 1984, John DeMatteis escribe una breve miniserie sobre Namor, un personaje, un antihéroe, bastante antipático. No es uno de mis personajes favoritos, bastante antipático. Y lo que hace DeMatteis con Namor es muy interesante porque resalta todos esos errores de Namor. Y la miniserie termina con Namor dándose cuenta que ha hecho una serie de errores que lo lleva a las circunstancias a donde está. Lo humaniza de esa manera. Mi pregunta es, ¿cuál fue su acercamiento al personaje de Namor y a esa miniserie en particular?
Yes, the question of Fernando is about your work in 1984.
For
You wrote, we all over here we say Namor, but I think it's Namor, the Prince of the Water. And he said that for Fernando wasn't very, he is not very good with the guy. Instead, a little older, I saw the first Namor Namor back in the late 60s and 70s. So this is a mashup in between for me, Mr. Spock and a siren, and Fernando said that your series center on a rather abrasive anti-hero. What is striking is that you allow him to commit a succession of heroes with the series, but when the series concluded, Namor make an own recognition of his mistakes, something that humanized him considerably. What was, is the question, your approach to this character and to that miniseries, considering this narrative arc that you performed of your hero?
Well, this presupposes that I remember what I was thinking back then. But I will say this, my approach is the same really with anything I write. And I remember what I remember about the Namor character is that I try to do with him what I try to do with any character I write. And when I teach writing classes, one of the things that I say is you've got to basically, metaphorically, of course, cut off the top of the character's head, get out a flashlight, and start rooting around in there and look for corners of their psyche that haven't been explored before. That to me is what makes, especially with these characters that have been, Namor was from what, 1940, that character started. So to have a character that's been around that long and has that much history, you have to dig in and find things to say that illuminates their humanity, that illuminates the demons in the corner, that corner of the psyche, and the angel in that corner of the psyche. One of the things I remember about that series is that there was that whole period when they brought him back in the 60s with the Fantastic Four, where he'd had amnesia for a while. And he was basically a homeless vagrant wandering around Manhattan with no memory, living a really horrible, traumatic life. And no one had ever dealt with that. And those are the kind of things I always look for. What hasn't anyone addressed that can illuminate this character? So if you're a prince, especially Namor, who is one of the most arrogant characters in comics, you don't get more
It
arrogant than
is.
Prince Namor. Um, to have to deal with the fact that you have basically been a homeless vagrant, begging for food on the streets, and what does that do to somebody? So that was a really important thing to explore. And what you say about the journey that the character went through, that's what you have to do. You have to get into all the flaws, all the mistakes, all the errors. And because I'm an essentially hopeful person, you want that person to come out the other end at least reaching for the light. I think it's really, really important that we look at the dark, that we look at the demons, that we crawl through that tunnel that's filled with broken glass. That's part of what storytelling is. You can't close your eyes to that, and that's what horror is about, right? You're looking at that. But the answer is, do you just leave someone in the tunnel with the broken glass bleeding, or do you bring them out of the tunnel and into the light? And I'm always on the side of bringing the character out of the tunnel into the light because I really believe in the light.
Good.
Y hablando de un personaje como Namor, podemos pasar entonces a The Defenders, un grupo de antihéroes con lo que DeMatteis trabajó bastante tiempo, y son un grupo de personajes muy relacionados con lo sobrenatural y con las zonas grises que dividen lo bueno de lo malo. De hecho, hasta demonios había dentro de ese grupo. Entonces, mi pregunta es, ¿fue en este grupo, escribiendo The Defenders, que él pudo por fin desarrollar ciertos temas metafísicos que luego terminaría de desarrollar, por ejemplo, en Doctor Fate?
The question of Fernando is about your characters in the Defenders. That is, they were a group of heroes closely associated with the supernatural, and many of their stories revolve around the nature of reality, religion, and gray areas that separate good from evil. The question is, was it through this group of outsiders that you first began to explore the metaphysical theme you later continue to develop in works such as Dr. Fate, these outsiders, outcast with some mix in between both realities, and sometimes good and evil, it was continue for you in works such as Dr. Fate?
Yeah, it's interesting as we're talking about horror, I'm realizing, it really runs through, that thread runs through a lot of my work, and I didn't realize that consciously. So I'm grateful for this conversation. I had been doing, all those stories at DC, those 6 and 8 page horror stories, and then when I went to Marvel, Defenders was one of my first big gigs, and I think it was just a natural continuation of what I'd been doing at DC, because there really wasn't a superhero team that dealt with the supernatural in any way at that point. In fact, years later, DC did Justice League Dark, and we were basically doing Justice League Dark back in 1980, which I only realized years later. But yes, I was still very new to the business. I can look back at those stories and kind of both admire what I did then and also see how much I still had to learn as a writer to express myself. But that was a very important series for me because the Defenders had a history, especially thanks to Steve Gerber, of being a very experimental book and a very personal book where a writer could come on that book and make it his or her own. And with Defenders, I was really given the freedom to explore just those things you're talking about. And I don't know if I was really consciously thinking about it. I was just following, I write very intuitively. So I was following my intuition, and these are the themes that interest me, right? Just what you say. What's the meaning of life? What about the evil inside us? What about the good inside us? What about those gray areas between us? What about the search for God? Is there a devil? Or is that just our own darkness projected outward? And those kinds of stories give you such a beautiful framework to explore these, what I think are the most important issues in our lives. So the fundamental issue in our life is, why are we here and what is this about? And I think if you don't ask that question, you're not living your life the right way. That's the question I started asking when I was 16, 17 years old. And the answer keeps deepening, and you keep asking it as you get older, and it gets deeper and deeper and deeper. So certainly in Defenders, I explored that, and those are themes that continue to run through all my work, and certainly into Dr. Fate, which is, again, was like, I guess, almost maybe 9 years after Defenders. So I was, I hope, a better writer by that point, and continued to explore those themes. That DC just finally, after all these years, collected Dr. Fate and put it out last summer. I'm so happy because that's a series that means a lot to me. In the 80s, we had a lot of freedom. On Dr. Fate, I basically took this pre-existing DC character and did whatever I wanted with it. They let me, it was basically a Vertigo book. It was like that weird and that off the beaten path, and yet it was done under the regular DC banner. And it allowed me to continue to explore those themes about what is life about, what is God, is there a God? If there is, what is that thing? What does that mean to us in our day-to-day lives? And then after that, I have to say, if I was going to continue that, when I did the Spectre at DC, some years after that, I had a run on the Spectre, which I felt to me thematically, not literally, but thematically, like a continuation of what I'd done on Dr. Fate. And in between, I did things like the Doctor Strange graphic novel Into Shambhala, which explores very similar themes, again, in a different way. But you can find those themes running through a lot of my work. And again, the framework of stories that deal with the supernatural. That's why I love the DC universe, especially has so many wonderful supernatural characters, that you get to open all those doors inside our psyches and in reality, right? What is reality? That's a fundamental question. And these stories allow you to really play with that and explore that. And I love it.
Great, great.
Y si hablamos entonces acerca del sentido de la realidad, la siguiente pregunta sería, ¿cuál fue la idea general, the general idea behind Blood, a Tale, that is John DeMatteis' most hermetic work?
Fernando is referring to your work, Blood, a Tale, that he would like to know what was the central, the main idea, because it is a rather hermetic story, almost.
Or we could just call it weird, right?
Yeah, indeed. But you say that, sir. No, I love that. Almost resemble a fable. What is your insight if you
I would even say more than a fable, it's sort of a fever dream,
Oh.
Over the years as I was working is that this stuff doesn't come from me. It comes from the unconscious. And I feel like the unconscious is the door to something even bigger than that. And I learned early on that it's really important in the writing process to get myself out of the way and let the unconscious do its work. I mean, sometimes I literally wake up in the morning and there's a movie playing in my head, and it's a story I've never seen before, and I'm watching it unfold like a movie, and I have to run to the computer to get the idea down and write it down and try to capture what's happening in my head that I have no control over. So I had this idea. I said, could I write an entire story by consciously writing from my unconscious? It sounds like those two things shouldn't work well together, but to really allow the unconscious free rein, let it come through. Don't question what it's about. Don't question where it's going. Just let it flow out of me. So I was friends with a wonderful artist named Kent Williams. Kent had worked and helped us out when I was doing Moonshadow with John J. Muth. And we were literally next door neighbors at the time. And Kent had a whole sketchbook filled with characters he'd just been doodling and creating for years. He didn't know who they were. Same thing. They came out of his unconscious. He didn't know who they were, what they were. He just had these drawings. So I thought, why don't I take these drawings of Kent's, wed them to whatever's bubbling in my unconscious, and see what happens? And just let it kind of almost like an ocean splash out of my unconscious and onto the page. And the joy of it was that Kent lived next door. So we'd be constantly running back and forth to each other's apartments. Like, hey, I just had this idea. Hey, I just painted this. Hey, why don't we do this? Hey, why don't we do that? And just let it go. So it's one of those stories where after the fact, I could tell you about the themes of the story and what was it about and where it was going. But I didn't want to think about that when I was writing it. I really wanted my unconscious to be as much in control, and Kent's unconscious as well. So we kind of put all that together. And in a weird way, it's like a fever dream. It's a Rorschach test. It's like when you wake up in the morning and you have some really weird dream and you sit through it and you go, oh, that meant that. And that meant that. And that meant that. But while you're having the dream, you're not thinking about that. You're just having this experience. And that's sort of what we intended Blood to be. I'm sharing my fever dream with you. Now, I know what it means to me now that I've finished it. But whatever it means to you might be something different, and that's just as valid in a weird way. Does that make sense?
Yes.
Yeah, absolutely. And besides, is a terrible lesson of writing, because it's how to let the river flow and catch the catfish or whatever. Catfish is too much southern, but well, I was in the University of Louisiana, the catfish was there all around, alligators and snake, but in the biggest, very big and lovely state of New York is like the Hudson flows, and let's see what happened.
Exactly. I've been doing this for more than 40 years, and what I love most about writing to me, where does this stuff come from? Why do I wake up in the morning with this movie playing in my head? Why do I sit down with a story and go, oh, it doesn't work, and then I go away and suddenly the whole answer comes flowing out of my brain? There's mystery to it, and I don't want the answer to that mystery. I love the mystery of the creative process. It's the best part. The conscious mind comes in later as the editor to clean it up and shape it and do everything. But for me, the most joyful moments are when the ideas just start flowing and I'm just following them. And I've had so many stories over the years where I've tried to get the story to do one thing, and the story is not interested in what I want to do. If I can give you my metaphor, it's like the story is a horse, and I'm on a horse, and I'm saying, horse, I want to go 3 miles that way. And we start to gallop, and then the horse starts to pull off to the right in another direction. And I'm no, I want to go that way. And then the horse pulls off again. And what I've learned over the years is the horse is always right. I'm wrong. If the story wants to gallop off in that direction, if the characters suddenly start doing things that I didn't expect and that I don't even understand, then I'm on the right track, because that's going to be the better story than the one that I have planned out. Now, I always plan it out. I have all these points that I want to hit. I set up these tent poles, but I love it when all my plans get thrown over. It's like you need a map, but you have to be ready at any point to take a match and burn up your map and see where the horse is going to lead you.
let me say, sir, uh, standing ovation. This is a hell of a lesson of writing. Thank you very much indeed
Oh, thank you. I'm glad you
your
appreciate it.
for your wisdom, for your wisdom. Thank you very much. Your generosity of sharing this kind of
Insight.
knowledge on the learning, because you don't wake up every morning realizing these things. You learn on the work, ongoing,
Yes,
with the
absolutely.
horses saying, "No, no, Mister, it's over there." So thank you very much.
You're
Next,
welcome.
guys.
Jorge.
Sí, para los años, entre los años 85 y 87, con un número autoconclusivo recién en el 97, escribe una historia de fantasía oscura llamada Moon Shadow, que es considerada una de las historias, una de las mejores historias contadas por el señor DeMatteis, y que está por fuera de ese paraguas que cubría a los superhéroes. Este, y en la introducción de Moon Shadow, eh, comenta que de alguna manera se sentía atrapado por los mecanismos narrativos convencionales del cómic. La pregunta particular es, ¿cómo influyó Moon Shadow en su obra posterior? O sea, ¿cómo influyó en su trabajo?
All right. Um, of course, Jorge is referring to your work, Moonshadow. He prays for this work of yours. He really appreciates that. And he mentioned that in the introduction of the work, you say that you felt constrained by the conventional narrative mechanism of the comic media. So the question is, how did Moonshadow influence the subsequent course of your career?
It was probably the most important, at that point, the most important thing I'd ever written, for the very reason that you bring up in the question. I don't know whether those constraints were put upon me or whether I put them on myself. But there's a certain form, and certainly back in those days, a certain form to what mainstream comics were and did. And to go back to Defenders, I realized with Defenders, without realizing it, I was pushing against those constraints in my own way. And I always responded to the writers, the Steve Gerbers, the Jack Kirbys, who pushed against those constraints. But with Moonshadow, because it was the first real creator-owned series I'd done, I stepped outside of the Marvel universe. I stepped out of the DC universe, and I didn't have to do that. I didn't, and again, it wasn't planned. That's the beauty of it. It just sort of happened. I was working with this extraordinary artist, John J. Muth, who's one of the greatest artists to ever work in the industry, and he is now a very, very successful writer and illustrator of children's books, and a dear friend. Um, and first of all, when you work with an artist like that, you have to up your game. So I think one of the wonderful things about Moonshadow was I had to up my game in response to his artwork. He upped his game in response to my writing, and we challenged each other, and we constantly made each other better. But for me, by stepping outside of the Marvel and DC universes, I approached Moonshadow as if I were writing a novel. I wasn't thinking this is how a comic book is. I was just writing the story that I wanted to write in the way that I wanted to write it. And in doing that, I didn't set out to find, quote, my voice as a writer, but that's how I found my voice. Because no one was telling me, and it was Creator-Owned Comics, it was Epic Comics run by Archie Goodwin, who was an amazing guy, and they gave you the freedom to follow your muse. And in following that story the same way we've been talking about it, I broke myself free of these chains, whether they were imposed on me by the company or imposed on me by myself, probably a little bit of both. And it set me free. And I was then when I went back to doing that work, I had this new mindset about how to approach a story. One of the things I did right after Moonshadow was Craven's Last Hunt. I would not have been able to write Craven's Last Hunt the way that I did had I not done Moonshadow first, had that not kind of broken me free of these constraints in my own head. And just to go back to what we were saying before about following the horse, one of the places where I really learned that lesson, we were on the third issue of Moonshadow. We had done the first two issues. I was just amazed. I thought, this is the best thing I've ever done. I didn't know how it turned out so well, but it really did. And I'm two-thirds of the way through the third issue, and the story just completely fell apart. I mean, it was whatever I was trying to write was just abysmal. I just couldn't get the story to work. And you know how it is if you're creative. Well, that's it. My career is over. I fooled people for a little while, but now they're going to realize that I'm a talentless, awful, terrible writer and my career's over. And
I
I
was
literally,
all my life an imposter. Yes.
right, exactly, exactly. And I literally was like paralyzed and I laid on the floor of my living room for like days, just like, oh, it's over now. And then all of a sudden, same thing that I was talking about before, like a movie. This entire scene appeared in my head, played out like a movie, and it was the end of the story that I'd been looking for. When I finally, when you have to surrender sometimes. When I finally surrendered, I made room for my unconscious to present me with the end of that story. And Moonshadow was certainly a series where I learned the fine art of surrendering to the unconscious and allowing those moments to lead me. It's I can't underestimate how important Moonshadow was to me personally and as a writer.
Absolutely. We couldn't agree more from the from the reader's side. Okay, guys, nice. Next.
Con respecto a Moonshadow, algunos críticos lo han considerado una sátira, la han leído como una sátira. Y nosotros, junto con Pablo, tuvimos una conversación con el escritor Joe Lansdale hace un par de semanas, en donde Joe Lansdale decía que el público lector, por lo menos el estadounidense, estaba perdiendo la capacidad de leer y entender sátira. Querría saber entonces si John DeMatteis está de acuerdo con esta aseveración.
Fernando referred that a couple of weeks ago, we both interviewed Joe Lansley. And he said that the American people for these days is losing the capability of satire. In the old ancient Greek theater sense, and that the readers are gradually losing this ability to recognize and appreciate the satire.
I don't know what's that word you're saying? They don't appreciate what?
Satire.
Satire?
Satire, yeah.
Okay.
Satire. Yes, sorry.
No, don't be sorry. I just want to make sure I'm getting it.
I'm saying in the yes, but you know.
Okay, got it.
It's funny in English in the law that the same Latin proverb you say in a way and we say in another. And I'm sure that I'm saying in the proper way because our language is pretty closest that the English in the to the Latin that the English. But wherever you go, you have to do what they do. So in the Romans, in Rome, as the Romans, so satire. So going back, John Lansley said that the satire is nowadays going back the fog of the people that are not able to distinguish or recognize and less more appreciate the satire. Do you share that view?
Nothing I ever thought of or really felt, but I can see where he's coming from if you think about the fact what satire has got to do is take reality and make it more absurd, right?
Yes.
And we're living in a world how do you satirize this world? I think comedy right now is in, how do you take what's going on, say, in the United States? How do you take Donald Trump and satirize that when he is a satire of himself? So I don't know if it's the audience that's the problem or reality that's the problem right now. That makes it hard for satire to succeed when we're living in what feels like a movie that's a very, very dark satire right now. Does that make sense?
Yes,
Yes,
absolutely.
perfecto.
Absolutely. Thank you. Next one, guys.
Llegamos entonces a uno de los fenómenos más reconocidos de Matthijs, que fue Justice League International, que no fue solamente un cómic, sino que fue un fenómeno global que llegó a todas partes, incluso a la Argentina, y todos, absolutamente todos, amamos la Día de la Justicia Internacional. Sobre todo como Jean de Matthijs y Kit Giffen la reversionan con muchísimo humor. Mi pregunta es sobre la recepción en su momento acerca de la Justice League, en el sentido de, había quejas de lectores acerca de que había un humor excesivo o de que los villanos estaban siendo convertidos en parodias. ¿Cuál fue la recepción en su momento en Estados Unidos de la Justice League International?
Fernando is referring to one of your major works, Justice League International, that was not merely a series, but something of a worldwide phenomenon. One of the questions is how was it received at the time? Because during those years, people in some way complained from some of the characters because you introduce a lot of humor. So many of the characters, or even the villains, were like a parodic villains. So how do you think that people receive this aspect of the work, and if they perceive it as an excess of humor, sense of humor?
It was actually incredibly well received at the time. We didn't expect it. We didn't. People think, first of all, that we set out to do funny superhero comics. We didn't. Just kind of going with what we're saying. It's just something that evolved. Working with Keith. Keith, created the plots, and then I would write the scripts. He kind of built the foundation, and I would script on top of that foundation. And there was a lot of humor in what Keith put into the plot, so I would build on what he did. He would build on what I did. And before we knew it, it was leaning, if you look at the early issues, it's really an adventure comic with a little bit of humor. And as it went along, the humor came more to the fore. But the humor really, for the most part, grew out of the characters. Yeah, occasionally we had like a ridiculous villain like Mr. Nebula, who was supposed to be a parody. But really, if you look at the characters, I think in a lot of ways the humor made the characters more real. They felt more like people that I knew in my life than these very serious, melodramatic superheroes. But when the book came out, the tone in comics, it was post Dark Knight, it was Watchmen, it was all that stuff. So that, the dark stuff was very, very at the top of the mountain right then. And we went completely against that. And again, we didn't plan it, it just happened. But the response was great. The book sold incredibly well right from the start. Before you know it, we spun off into Justice League Europe, and then there was the 80-page Justice League Quarterly, and I was doing miniseries and spin-offs. And so for like 5 years, we were almost like our own little line of books in the DC line, our own subline of books. And it was, for me, it was the beginning of a wonderful collaboration with Keith that went on for a good 30 years after that. Keith, one of the most creative human beings I've ever had the pleasure to know and work with. I always call him the Jack Kirby of my generation of comic book creators. Just nothing, just ideas popping out of his head like constantly. You couldn't stop it. And we had a wonderful editor in Andy Helfer who put us together in the first place, one of the best editors in the business. And then for the big first year and a half, we had Kevin McGuire, who was the perfect artist because no one can do acting on the page like Kevin Maguire. So if you want to sell the humor, especially humor that comes out of the characters, you need that great acting. If someone else had drawn that book, we might not be having a conversation about it today. It's all about chemistry with these books. It's the writer and the artist and the editor. It's just like when you meet people just socially. You either have the chemistry with them or you don't. And it's the same thing creatively, especially when you have comics where it's about a team of people, especially the writer and the artist. If you don't have that chemistry, the best idea in the world is going to fall apart. And we were very lucky in Justice League. We didn't know what we had, and then it just sort of developed into something really, really special. And I'm sure there were people that thought that, oh, I like my superheroes very serious and blah, blah, blah. But the book sold really, really well and did really, really well for DC for 5 years. And then, of course, we got back together and did various, reunions and spin-offs. And Keith and I worked on so many different projects together. So, yeah, it was one of the great periods in my career working on that book.
Y ya que estamos con la Liga de la Justicia Internacional y Justice League Europe, la pregunta sería, ¿por qué se terminó todo eso? ¿Qué circunstancias llevaron a que se terminara esas dos ligas con las storylines breakdowns?
Yes, the question is about this Justice League International and Justice League Europe, and Fernando is trying to find the reason because you conclude the series altogether with the storyline entitled Breakdowns.
So the question is, why did we conclude the story?
Yes.
Yeah. I think we knew that we were done. We had kind of reached the end point. And, if you would have asked Keith and if you asked me, we might have even stayed a little bit too long at the fair, as the phrase goes. So we just knew we were ready to go. We had, it'd been 5 years of a lot of material. Like I said, I was doing all these spin-offs and we were doing Justice League Quarterly. I left Justice League Europe after a certain point, and Keith kept on with that with different writers. And we were just done. We were done. And what's so interesting is, people talk about that book now, and I'm so grateful. I mean, that I'm talking to you guys, in another country, and this book means so much to you. And I've traveled around the world, and we forget that this work goes out all around the world. And wherever I go, I was just in Brazil for a convention in December. People love Justice League. We didn't know. We had no clue that the idea that all these years later I'd be talking to you guys about Justice League would have never crossed my mind. And it took us 10 years went by from the time we stopped doing Justice League to when we got back together for a series called I Can't Believe It's Not the Justice League. I think that's what it was called. Formerly known as the Justice League. That's what we got back together for. And it was when me, Keith, and Kevin, when we started working on that series, that's when we said, oh, you know what? What we do together is really special. It took us that long to figure it out because when you're working on a monthly comic book, especially one with all these spin-offs, you're not thinking about these things. You're just trying to get the work done and get the work out. So 10 years went by. We started working together again, and we went, holy moly, this is really good. We should keep working together. And that's why with Kevin, but also a lot without Kevin, Keith and I kept working together, pretty much until he passed away, because we realized that we could create something together that we couldn't create separately.
Excellent.
Jorge.
You are mute, my friend.
Sorry.
Oh, okay.
Tal vez Batman y Spider-Man sean dos representantes de corrientes de pensamiento muy diferentes dentro de la sociedad estadounidense. La pregunta es, ¿cómo fue combinar esos pensamientos en los crossovers que escribió sobre estos dos personajes?
Yes, I could say that this is my own question too. Batman and Spider-Man might be say that they represent rather different currents of thought within American society. What was it like bringing those perspectives together in the crossover stories you wrote featuring both characters.
Yeah, again, at the time I didn't think about it. I look back now, and the fact that I got to write two Batman Spider-Man stories, one for Marvel and one for DC, it's kind of amazing to me that I got to do that because I love both those characters. And the interesting thing for me, especially in the first one, was looking at them both because, as I said, I really like to get in their heads and explore these characters. From on the outer levels, they couldn't be more different. Spider-Man represents he's every man. He's got all our flaws and all our failures and all our struggles, but always gets back up and represents hope, and a sort of light. And he's got this sense of humor, and Batman is very, very dark, almost borderline vigilante. Although Batman is a character you can interpret many different ways, and I have in different stories. You look at Batman in Justice League International is very, very different than Frank Miller's Batman.
Absolutely.
But it's still but it's still Batman. There's a
That-
fundamental quality that stays the same. But what was interesting to me was they both kind of come out of the same soup. They both come out of tragedy. It's the loss of his parents and then the murder of Uncle Ben that drives Spider-Man. It's the murder of his parents that drives Batman. So two guys coming out of the same kind of trauma and yet responding to it in two different ways. It's very interesting. It's sort of like, people that come out of the same dysfunctional family where there may be trauma in the family. And yet the brother feels one way about life and the sister may have a completely different view because they respond to the trauma differently. And so Bruce, and I think the difference for the two characters, I don't know what the difference is for the broader society, but the difference for the two characters is Peter had Aunt May and Uncle Ben to raise him after his parents died, and then he had Aunt May there after Uncle Ben died. He came from a cocoon of love. Whatever the trauma was, whatever the guilt was, there was love there. Bruce Wayne had Alfred, not to take anything away from Alfred, but Alfred was not his father. Alfred was the butler. And it's not the same as being raised in a loving family, even though you could say that obviously Alfred loved Bruce, but it's not the same thing. And I think that lack of family helped dictate who they became. And yet, who is Batman? What does he surround himself with? He has the sidekick, and there's Batgirl and Batwoman and Bathound and Bat whoever. There's a whole. I wrote a movie, that had a whole Batman family. And there's so many Bat characters out there because if you look at it psychologically, he's trying to create the sense of family that he lost. Whereas Peter he never lost that sense of family. Even when he lost his parents, even when he lost Uncle Ben, there was family there to support and love him. And is it a different sides of American society? Yeah, I guess so. But a lot of it depends on how Batman is portrayed. At his worst, Batman is portrayed as some kind of like psycho. And I don't like psycho Batman. I think the Batman's issue psychologically as a character is he's decided to take on this persona of the dark Bat figure. But it's a persona. It's a mask psychologically and physically. Batman's issue and his problem, and I wrote a graphic novel years ago called Batman Absolution, which explored this issue, is that sometimes you become the mask that you're wearing. So he's pretending to be a creature of the night to terrify criminals and to make a particular statement. But there's an old Kurt Vonnegut line, we are what we pretend to be. If you pretend to be that thing for so long, you're in danger of becoming the very thing that you're pretending to be and losing your humanity in the process. And I think that's one of the interesting things about Batman. Whereas Spider-Man, in a lot of ways, putting that mask on liberated Peter. He was the little nerdy kid, and suddenly he puts his mask on and he gets to be funny, be out there, and do all these things that Peter Parker never could. And yet it's all Peter Parker. I think Batman's road is a little more psychologically dangerous.
Yes. Yes. If I use Batman is my own hero. I grew up watching Adam West, of course, Batman. So this is my own hero. But I will always used to say, making a, a mashup with some great rock band singer, that if I wouldn't be Batman, I would be an assassin, a killer. So this is very important for me, because this is the way that remember me, the kind of person that is really behind the persona, the mask of, in the Greek sense of mask, of persona. So
Yes.
if I weren't a superhero, I would be a killer. Yes, indeed. Guys,
So I just want to let you know I have about 10 minutes and then I have to go.
ok, ok.
Ok,
Tenemos 10 minutos.
perfecto. ¿10 minutos?
Ya.
Listo. Listo. Vayamos entonces a Craven, Last Hunt, otra de las obras maestras de DeMatteis. Y la pregunta es esta. Es una obra maestra que trata sobre los roles en la sociedad y diferentes tipos de masculinidad. Una de las cosas que llama la atención de esa obra en particular es el dibujo de Mike Zeck, en donde varias veces se dibuja a Craven desnudo, y cuando está vestido, su taparrabo es absolutamente diminuto, e incluso Peter Parker aparece en Sleep. Hay una erotización de los cuerpos, lo cual es llamativo en una obra que habla sobre masculinidades. Entonces, mi pregunta es, ¿eso fue intencional? ¿Fue parte de la narrativa?
Fernando is referring to Craven Last Hand, that is widely regarded of another of your masterpiece. These Cravens deals with the search for one's role in life, and with the different ways of understanding masculinity. The artist Mike Zeck depicts Craven nude in several scenes, and even when clothed, his loincloth is notably minimal, revealing a great deal of skin. Peter Parker himself appears wearing only brief in certain moments. Was the erotization, is the question, of the male body conceived as a deliberate narrative element?
No, there was nothing conscious about trying to eroticize the male body in there. With Craven, it was just, well, first of all, I never cared. If you remember what Craven used to wear, these like leopard skin pants that I always thought were really silly looking.
Yeah,
This is this great
Y vas así.
jungle hunter.
yeah.
He and psychologically he was being stripped down in this story. Do you know what I mean? And if he's the great hunter, the jungle, the primal man, then you want to see him in the most primal way. It wasn't meant in any sort of erotic way at all. It was more about that the primal quality. And with Peter, he just happened to be, there was a scene where he wakes up in the middle of the night, and that's what he was sleeping in. There was nothing like that going on there. But for Craven, it really underscored to see him, naked in a mass of spiders
Yes.
eating these things. And what's funny, again, we're talking about this, and I keep saying, well, I'm not really much of a horror guy, but Craven's Last Hunt is a horror story. It's a horror story first and a superhero story second. And it's psychological horror more than anything
Indeed,
else.
indeed,
Um, so yeah, so no, there wasn't. And again, maybe that's in there, but if it's in there, it certainly wasn't in there consciously. And that's what I like. I like that people could look at these stories and find things that I don't see. And it doesn't make your insight less valid just because I don't see it. Do you know what I mean?
Yes, absolutely. We couldn't agree more. Come on, guys. Next.
Jorge, last question.
Bueno, agradeciéndole su tiempo, la última pregunta es, ¿qué le llevó a crear su propia editorial, Spellbound Comics?
Jorge is talking about your own publishing company, Spellbound Comics,
Yes.
and he would like to know the reason, if you can share with us, to establish your own publishing company.
Sure. Since the beginning with Moonshadow, I've always sort of gone back and forth between creator-owned comics and the mainstream comics. And, creator-owned comics give you freedom to basically create your own universes and your own characters from the ground up. It's really, really fun to work with these iconic characters and play in the Marvel universe and play in the DC universe. But there's nothing more satisfying as a writer than creating something of your own. The past few years I've gone back to prose, and have 3 books have come out the past 3 or 4 years, and it's just such a wonderful, fulfilling thing to just create from the ground up without anyone telling you how to do it, what to do, what character to use, or anything like that. So I've always gone back to creator-owned series, and over the years, I've seen what was going on Kickstarter, and what I love about Kickstarter is sort of like this wall between the creator and audience just gets erased. You're not going through a publisher per se. It's just you and the audience, and they support the work and they get the work. And so I always have ideas. I've got if you were to rummage through my computer, you would find ideas that I've been stockpiling for years. And sometimes it takes years to get these ideas out in the world. I've had stories that have taken 10 years, 20 years before I found a publisher.
The
So
rambling sense, yes.
yeah, and I was just reading through some old stuff the other day. It's like here's like a 20-page outline for this great story that has yet to make it out into the world. So I was talking to a friend of mine, a writer named David Baldy, who worked in TV for many years as a writer and a producer, saying, I'd love to do a Kickstarter, but I don't have a business brain. I have the creative brain. I don't have the brain to like watch over the Kickstarter and deal with this and deal with that. And well, he has a business brain. He said, well, I'll help you with it. So between the two of us, we put together this little imprint, Spellbound Comics. And he said, what do you want to do? And I said, well, I've got a bunch of ideas. And I pitched him like 4 ideas. And it was David who said, let's do all of them. So it was his idea to do 4 number 1 issues. And then we actually threw in a 5th bonus book. So when, as a creator, do you get to put 4 or 5 new ideas out in the world at the same time? And I ended up working with an amazing group of artists, just each one of whom is just a favorite of mine. And so we did the first Kickstarter and got out the first 4 issues, and we did the second, got out the second issues, and hopefully we'll be gearing up for the third soon. We've had some glitches in the matrix that has slowed us down a little bit, but we will get these third books out because I want to get them out because these stories mean so much to me. And each one is in a different genre, it's a different tone, it's a different style, and it's all me. It's just all these stories that I've wanted to tell. So it's very exciting because there are a lot of places in comics now to do creator-owned work. There are not a lot of places to go to be paid well for creator-owned work. When we did Moonshadow for Epic Comics, or the early days working for Vertigo, you could do creator-owned work. You could own your property or co-own it with the company and actually be paid well. Now there are companies out there that are like, yeah, well, you guys work for free, and we'll take half the publishing profits and half the media profits. And well, why do I even want to go work for you? I would rather just do this, get together with these artists, create the work ourselves, and put it out in the world through Kickstarter. And then, whether it works or it doesn't work, we're the owners of that, and we control our own creative destiny. So it's really one of the most exciting projects I've ever worked on in all these years, to work on all these different ideas and get them out in the world. And I'm very excited to move forward with the third issues of all these books. So thank you for asking, because that's an important one for me.
All right.
Bien.
So
Entonces no le robamos más tiempo a John DeMatteis y le agradecemos, por favor, Pablo, su tiempo con nosotros.
Mr. DeMatteis, we really we have no words of gratitude for your time, your sharing, your knowledge, your kindness, your let me finish with this very morning a friend of mine said, I'm acting like some kind of Greek doctor and say, sorry, hey, how you can take a look? No, because I'm preparing for interview somebody. And my friend said, who? I can't say. And I say, but it's something from the comic side. Oh, right, as a writer, yes, indeed. And he started to name the most famous, even the late ones. And I'd say, my friend, I'm about to interview a person that could say to all of these people that you name, hold my beer. So, sir.
Well, that's a high compliment. Thank you so much.
Thank you
This has
very
been a
much.
pleasure. I've really enjoyed talking to you guys. And if you ever want to do it again, just ask. I'm sure you have more questions, and I'd be happy to come back and talk to you again.
Thank you very much indeed,
Thank you.
sir.
Thank you.
We
Thank you.
really
Kind.
appreciate your time.
Take good care, guys.
You
Bye.
too. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
Bye.
Bye.